Okay, everyone, we will start in the next 30 seconds. For those of you who just joined us, please use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to put your name and the country where you're connecting from. And don't forget that you can also use the chat box to ask questions at the end of the presentation. This is one more presentation of our monthly webinar outreach program. As you may know, if it's not the first time you're listening to one of our webinars, the Department of Human Resources issues a webinar every month on topics of relevance to recruitment, talent acquisition, interview preparation, or anything related to the promotion of the OSCE as an employer of choice. Given the current situation with the COVID-19 crisis and pandemic, we felt it was a nice opportunity to actually do a service to our potential applicants or to individuals who have been paying attention to the OSCE, whether or not they are interested in applying for a position with us. The webinar today is called Tips on Remote Working and Psychological Wellbeing, a conversation between psychologists and HR professionals. A very important piece of this presentation is the following disclaimer. Please note that this presentation is not, I repeat, it is not intended to provide medical advice, diagnose, or substitute counseling or treatment for anyone. The opinions expressed during this presentation represent tips on remote working and psychological well-being in relationship to the coronavirus pandemic. However, they have been extrapolated from well-known best practices in the psychological and human resources literature. Always refer to your primary care physician and medical authorities when making decisions about your physical or mental health. And obviously, when it comes to making decisions about the way you work, the way you conduct your activities, the way you complete your tasks, you also need to refer to your own human resources office and your employers. Therefore, these are just best practices that we found in the literature given the COVID-19 crisis and outside of the situation. We do have the pleasure today of having two psychologists, two doctor psychologists who work for the OSCE, particularly at the Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine. And both of them will introduce themselves now and tell us a little more about themselves and what they do at the world's largest regional security organization. Dr. Ellis, up to you.
All right, good morning. I'll be brief. I'm a clinical psychologist with a strong neuropsychological background. I've worked for over 20 years supporting people in a wide variety of contexts, NGOs, international organizations, and even 6 years in the Middle East for an international school. All of this is basically to help people, support people, to be able to manage stress-related issues, be able to manage our own nervous systems in a way that even though things can be challenging, conflictual, is a way that we can stay calm and feel grounded and safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ellis. And we all know that especially working for the Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine or any other field operations at the OSCE, you're very busy. So we very much appreciate your time. Now let's move on to Dr. Sangvi, who will now introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. I have been practicing psychology as a clinical psychologist for the past 34 years. So it's been a very, very long time. And also in various countries, specifically India, then New Zealand and Canada, and now I'm in Ukraine. Basically, my strength and my basis of practice is on cognitive behavior therapy. And so basically deals with thoughts and feelings and how to change your thoughts and therefore how to change your feelings. This has been my first mission, and I've actually enjoyed this 1 year. I've just had my first anniversary on the 11th of May, and it has been a delight working with the mission members. And that was one of my dreams, to work with people who are actually providing service to other people. So I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Sangvi. Again, our appreciation. We know very well that you are actually in the field right now in Donetsk, if I'm not mistaken.
I am.
Very good. So we know that you're quite busy, so we appreciate the amount of time you've taken to you and Dr. Ellis to prepare with us. Very appreciated. Now we're going to go to the OSCE folks. And since I'm already speaking, I'll let my colleague go last. My name is Gustavo Araújo. I'm the Chief of Recruitment here at the OSCE, and we work with talent acquisition for the Secretariat and supporting the field operations and the executive structures. I actually have a background in clinical psychology myself, but a master's degree. So my experience in actually working as a clinician is very little because I transitioned from that into human resources and a few other jobs here and there. It's a pleasure being here with you, and it's great to actually have people participate in this event today. And now I'll move on to Marta.
Thank you, Gustavo, and good afternoon to everybody. My name is Marta Fernandez de Mazarambroz, and I'm recruitment officer. I work with Gustavo on talent acquisition matters, outreach, and making the OSCE an employer of choice, and increasing the candidate experience of everybody who applies. I myself have also a master's degree in clinical psychology. I had the opportunity to work a little bit at the beginning of my career in this fascinating field. And then, as to Gustavo, I also transitioned into human resources, where I have worked the rest of my professional career in both private and public sector. I'm really happy to be here today to share some tips with you from my own experience during this odd situation and working remotely.
Very good. Thank you very much, Marta, and thanks again to all our speakers. So our presentation today is divided into two main parts. And I'm going to talk about the summary of the first part, and Marta is going to introduce the summary of the second part. The first part is focused on remote working, where we're going to present to you some tips for employees, individual contributors, tips for parents and caregivers, tips for managers, and family-friendly tips. Marta, could you introduce the second?
Sure. The second part is we're diving into the psychological well-being, and here, with the help of George and Anuka, we're going to hear more about understanding your feelings and focusing on what you can control, and also focusing on positive behaviors and habits.
Very good. And that's very important that you all understand that this is just a brief 45-minute, 50-minute presentation. And you may hear a lot of things that you already know, but the idea is for us all to share some experiences that may be valid to some of you, maybe not valid to some of you, but if you learn a little something today, or you get to remind yourself of a little something that's useful throughout the time that we are engaging in remote working, this is already a success for this type of event. So what we're going to start today is actually looking at some tips for individual contributors. One thing that's very important is that you help yourself maintain focus during the work hours. As you know, it's a lot easier to succumb to distractions. Those distractions may be coming from the environment. It could be a TV that sometimes you leave on, even the fridge for some people, or even children or people to whom you have to provide care. But you also have some level of control to your distractions. So here are some things that you can do. One thing is understand your work rhythms, meaning gauge when you are most alert during the day and schedule most complex tasks for a time slot that you are most alert if possible. Obviously, you have to juggle a lot of other issues throughout the day, particularly if you are homeschooling, and Marta is going to be giving you some more information on that. Some people use tricks such as creating visual cues for their family, such as creating a sign and say, do not interrupt mommy or daddy during the day, or I am doing some focused work right now, or they may actually put something on the table on the desk to indicate that they are busy with calls. So find ways to have a certain separation if possible, so that you can actually do a little more deep work and become a little more available when you can do shallow work. In other words, let people know visually by placing a sign or object, or even choosing a door. If you happen to have an office at work and you can tell people at the same home as you that you're closing the door, as long as it's not the whole day, that you can allow yourself to come in and out, because it's fully impossible to completely separate life from work when you're working from home, but you can try and engage some control in that. So this is one of the tips that we have. Another tip that we have is leverage technology to your benefit. And there are some basic things that people can know. Today, for example, I've talked to my team about appropriately using even Skype for Business or Lotus Notes or status updates or statuses to show people when you are busy and when you are available. A lot of people forget that, but if you keep your status available when you're actually conducting deep work or you are being interrupted by calls, this makes your work schedule, your work day, a lot more stressful. So it's really important that you leverage these statuses throughout the day. I usually tell recruiters that work with me on the team, if you are in interviews, put that on the statuses, conducting interviews. It's nice for the stakeholders to also know, not to just show that you're being present. We're trying to avoid presenteeism, but managed by results, but also to let stakeholders know that you continue operating within the circumstances that's possible. Another thing that we focus on is enhancing trust and accountability. What does that mean exactly? That means communicate openly and often about the goals and what you need to achieve during the day. So if you have a good relationship with your supervisor, coworkers, talk to them about what is critical and what is essential in the tasks being assigned versus what could be adjusted given the remote working conditions. Obviously, a lot depends on what kind of work environment you have, and what kind of supervisor you have, and what kind of colleagues you have, right? Usually, when you're participating in meetings, have a mental or written summary of what's been accomplished that day or prior in between meetings, or at least during catch ups with your boss or teams to remain accountable and also to provide an overview of what's getting done. The tendency that we typically have when we are communicating remotely is when people ask a question, how are things? What are you working on today? A lot of people say, all good, all covered. That may not be good enough because you're lacking this face to face interaction. You're lacking the contact during the coffee breaks. You're lacking the contact in the hallways. And it's important sometimes to be overly obvious and direct about what you're doing. This is what I've accomplished today. Here's what I'm looking at tomorrow. Here are some of the issues that I experienced, because it's important to maintain this communication, which is not to be taken for granted, the fact that we are working from home and don't have as much contact as often. When it comes to enhancing trust and accountability, it's also important for you to be mindful about if you have bandwidth. How can you be helpful to others? Or even better yet, for a lot of people who are feeling a little overwhelmed with managing work at home and managing caregiving duties, how is it that people can help you? What are the tasks that you're struggling with? Be aware and also become direct in a way to communicate, if possible and if appropriate, with your supervisors and also with your coworkers. And last but not least, in this particular slide is remain visible, but it's not remaining visible just for presenteeism purposes. A lot of people in certain work cultures feel that just going to the office and sitting at your desk is enough to say that you are working. When in fact, it's the time now in which people are managing by results. So be clear about what is it that you need to be producing that day. Have conversations, remain visible when you need to remain visible, but also allow yourself not to be visible as long as you pre-agree. If you agree in advance, if you have a conversation with your team, particularly for the individuals who have other responsibilities during the day, and Marta will talk about that, maybe it's not possible for you to be available from 8 to 10 as you used to. And this is something that needs to be talked about so that there is no room for ambiguity, because that may make life a lot more stressful for you and prevent you from actually accomplish what you should be accomplishing at the time. We're going to move on now to tips for managers. This is just one of the slides that I'm almost done. Managers have a very important role, particularly in communication, and particularly communicating to employees while working remotely, so the entire team also understands the importance of results rather than being present, rather than being just visible, or rather than having a status as available. You can also use virtual collaboration platforms like SharePoint, Slack, Microsoft Teams. If some of you have not been engaged in using those platforms, I highly recommend that you look into them. If you have them available, that you do not shy away from learning, because this is the wave of the future. As a lot of people are talking right now, working from home may become more and more common, to our benefit and to our detriment. So if we are able to use those platforms, we will be more likely to control the environment in which we work and to make things easier for us. And from me, last but not least, seek clarity on your tasks and responsibilities. Let's not forget that at these times, you may not be able to accomplish the same type of work by engaging in the same types of processes. For example, in international organizations, the use of electronic signatures is somewhat of a taboo. It's a little difficult. Now, because of COVID-19, it's all become more acceptable because we had to find a way to continue business going instead of running around paperwork to get people to get signatures for different types of processes. So this is something that's been imposed on us, but there are ways that we can actually leverage technology or leverage different ways to accomplish our everyday tasks and responsibilities by focusing on what's important and by focusing on the results rather than the amount of time that typically takes to accomplish those. If you have any questions about some of those tips, you'll be able to ask them at the end of the presentation. But now I'm going to switch to my colleague Marta, who will provide us some family-friendly tips for managers.
Thank you, Gustavo, and thank you for the tips that you have given us on the previous slide. I have several tips that I can give you as a manager and as a mother, actually. So I have a family, and I'm experiencing what most of you probably are experiencing with dependents, which is not easy actually to manage teleschool with teleworking. And here are some tips that I've been reading, that I have experienced myself, that I have discussed with other parents, which might help you. Planning in advance. Ask yourself as a manager, what do you want to plan in advance? What can be done already in advance? How often do you liaise with your counterparts and keep up with deadlines and planned activities? In our experience, planning has become a key competency, even more important than it was before. There are plenty of decisions and steps that were reached through face-to-face communication in the cafeteria, at informal meetings or formal meetings. And now all this needs to be put in writing or discussed remotely, and this takes time. Meeting preparations, in our case, pre-discussion meetings, for example, or pre-interview meetings that used to be done shortly before the real meeting, now should take place at least one day earlier. Or projects in which multiple stakeholders are involved might need steps to be divided in sub-steps, for example. So take advantage of the gain time in not having to prepare yourself to physically go to the office, take the kids to school, and use it to ensure that everything at home is ready for that conference call that you need to participate in, and also for your dependents that need to be taken care of and that have deadlines to meet as well, or maybe conference calls themselves. And remember, it is not about presenteeism, as Gustavo mentioned, it's about output. We also need to remain flexible when thinking of what yourself and your team need to achieve. Consider that you might need to adjust deadlines, move appointments around, and also manage stakeholders' expectations. Take into account that your team members, maybe yourself, need to accommodate non-office commitments too. You need probably to move around schedules so in order to include the schedule of your own children. And also in terms of the team, make sure that your team feels that support, that you are remaining flexible, and as long as they tell you where they are, what they're doing, they can actually move things around and do it as they see fit. Be mindful of assumptions. We tend to think that others are experiencing this very odd situation the same way as we do. And I often hear childless colleagues saying, "Oh, I'm so busy, and also in the end, so bored, and I'm tired, and I cannot even imagine how it must be with children at home." or maybe I'm so happy in my spacious apartment I cannot even think of how it can be for others with smaller crowded homes. Well, we managers have to take this responsibility and the obligation to see how our team members are doing, to constantly liaise with our people, ask how they are coping with this. Maybe they're not coping in the same way as we are. Really be empathic and also see what they feel comfortable doing. What troubles are they encountering? We should not make assumptions, but realize personal situations and environments, address concerns and challenges, and think that as the situation continues and continues in time, it doesn't seem to be an end. Mood, motivation goes up and down, is not every day the same. And this applies to our teams, it applies to our household members, it applies a lot to the children, as you probably know, and it also applies to ourselves. And Gustavo, if you could go to the next slide. I will then walk you through the other team other tips in terms of schedule consistency. Try to keep the structure of the day as it was prior to remote working, both for your dependents as much as for your team. But of course, there are things that is impossible to keep up and continue doing at the same pace or on the same day. Single out those activities and tasks which require more time or effort due to the lack of face-to-face working and reserve a specific day and time for it. For the rest, schedules and business should be as much as possible as usual. The more normality we bring to our daily work, the less energy we will invest in having different schedules every day. In doing so, consider schedules for your dependents as well. So as I mentioned before, do not forget that children cannot start doing their homework when you finish at 7 o'clock in the evening or 5 o'clock. They will be tired by then. So you need to include their schedules in as well. And when applicable, planning should include partner swaps with maybe 4-hour shifts in which one partner works while the other watches the kids. Designating a workspace. In coming up with a schedule, you should also designate a physical space at home for home matters and for office matters. Make a distinction between this, and also include office hours. Waking up in the morning, turning on your computer in pajama in bed, starting to respond to emails will only lead you to long and unstructured working days, and this will drain your energy. A working space with a planned schedule will help you focus and concentrate on what you need to concentrate at that moment. I would also set boundaries for children at home who will soon learn that there are moments when daddy or mommy or both need to work undisturbed. Gustavo, you were mentioning this before as well. So definitely make this space for yourselves and for your children. And on communication, communicate early and often. And communication is another of the absolute key competencies these days. This, if it was important now, it's even more important nowadays. And we cannot over communicate. And just to let you know, in our team, we have actually increased our weekly meetings to 3 meetings a week. And you might say, oh my God, that's a lot. Well, it's not, because we really use them for catching up, reporting, announcing important things on what the Secretary General has instructed everybody to do according to the Austrian authorities on COVID and on remote working and so on. But it also is used for just having a laugh, sharing experiences among parents or maybe childless colleagues, and for bonding. We even have a virtual happy hour where at the end of the day, at the end of the week, we just all toast and we just have a laugh and some jokes, and we just share with each other. So definitely take the chance to communicate, and don't think you're over communicating. This cannot happen, especially now working in this situation. And as Gustavo said, I'm very happy to respond to questions you might have at the end of the presentation.
Very good. Thank you very much, Marta. And again, as I mentioned before, some of these things may be things that you already know. They sound like common sense, but it's important for all of us to be reminded at times when we are stressed out. that we can have some sort of control and take actions, the things that we can make an impact on our daily lives. Now we're going to move on to the second half of the presentation, which is focused on psychological well-being. And that's when we're going to have our two clinical psychologists jump in and provide their input. So if that's okay, I'm going to move on to Dr. Ellis and Dr. Sangvi.
All right. Well, thank you, both of you. I appreciate it. Well, I want to first start with what psychological well-being is before Renuka talks a little bit about feelings and anxiety and those issues that can come from being sort of quarantined, a lot of the things that Marta and Gustavo were talking about. But I wanted to back it up and just say, what is psychological well-being? I talk about it a lot. You see it in the media. So basically, when professionals are talking about well-being, they're really talking about this internal sense in our own bodies, in our own experience of feeling happy, satisfied, and accomplished. It's this sense of self-acceptance, there's meaning and purpose in life. There's a feeling of control and mastery and positive self-esteem. That is that sense of well-being that people mean when they talk about it. And I think that most of us, when we think about COVID-19 or just stressors that all of us face in our lives, financial, related, looking for work, management issues, conflicts with partners, there is a great deal of stress in our lives. And our nervous systems weren't necessarily designed to deal with this kind of stress. Because in reality, our nervous systems are millions of years old. We're much more designed to deal with lions, tigers, and bears than they were a traffic jam. Or for that matter, bills coming in and we just don't quite have the money. So psychological well-being is an art. And it's an internal experience that what Renuka and I will try to do in a few minutes is convey how to try to maybe consciously move ourselves into that space, even when things around us can be pretty crazy. Kind of like finding the eye of the storm so that we can have a sense of peace, a sense of safety in our own skins. So I will turn this over now to Renuka, but basically we'll always be coming back to the idea that how can we consciously manage our nervous systems to be able to feel safe and within that eye of the storm and watch it, but not be completely overwhelmed by it. Renuka.
Thank you, George. So yes, understanding feelings. So basically what I'm going to focus here on are these, some of the diagnostic terms that we have put up here. But anxiety is one of the most common disorders that we all encounter, and it is almost like a 21st century disease of the mind. So with the COVID, I think it has probably worsened for some people, and for people that didn't have it has brought about feelings of anxiety. So what do we mean by anxiety? Anxiety is worrying constantly about things and not having solutions for some of them. Depression contributes due to negative thoughts, negative feelings, which result into a kind of a helpless feeling. Sometimes these feelings, if one is not aware or not taken any kind of intervention, end up into a psychosomatic symptom. So headaches, backaches, body pain. These are all the body saying, attend to some of these. Your mind, relax and do something different. Irritability is one of the most common things. It could be the beginning of a depressive illness, but it starts with not wanting to be with people, wanting to be alone, and furthering the problem of isolation and loneliness. So basically what's important here is how we can change some of our thoughts into becoming a little bit more positive, and therefore changing some of our thinking, and it also influences how we feel. I'd like to focus a little bit on perception that George also spoke about. So basically what we see is our perception, and how we interpret that perception become our thoughts. How we react to those thoughts end up our feelings, and how we act upon those feelings end up in our behaviors. So if we are self-aware, we can intervene right at the time of the perception, whether it is wrong, whether it is inappropriate, whether it is not true, whether it is realistic, and therefore the remaining thoughts, feelings, and actions become more fruitful and realistic with a positive outcome. I think I'll go to the next slide here because I'm already on thoughts and feelings. And this is one good way of changing thoughts and feelings. The other thing that I'd like to bring about is many of us do not realize how distorted our thoughts are, but we don't realize unless someone points it out. So a lot of irrational fears, distortions, cognitive distortions that we psychologists tend to call. One is focusing on the negative. So selectively picking up negative information, attending to those, and inability to make decisions upon those lead to what management people today call as decision fatigue. Yes, we can't make any decision because every day things change. The second that is related to anxiety is catastrophizing. So anticipating the worst and building up on the negative aspect of not being able to cope. It could be finances, it could be job, it could be careers. And yes, a lot of those have been disrupted with the COVID. Not just ourselves in relation to career, but even our children or maybe other family members. One other thing, we are always planning. And in order to make life easier, we plan very much ahead in time. Now, this has basically forced us to not predict the future and plan because nobody knows what's happening. So this awareness of uncertainty of future will definitely increase our anxiety, especially for those that are used to planning, organizing, and following through. The best way to do that is maybe take this as a blessing and live in the moment and just do what we can do today and what we can have control over. And this takes away some of the anxiety of planning for the future. Some people's thoughts could probably be negative in the sense this is never going to get better, and being fatalistic about it, and creates helplessness and might be contributing to depressive thinking. How one can change that this will never get better? Maybe we can start saying that it will never be the same again, which is the truth. Our lives are not going to be the same again. It has changed us in many ways. So therefore, we can start thinking about how we can prepare for this change. And that also brings about hopefulness that the change is for the positive. So therefore, we could look at the present moment as on a positive note. I think it has also forced many of us to become more resilient, deal with uncertainty for those who like definitive and predictive predictions, more time to think about ourselves and family and probably plan about what changes we can make. The working from home has decreased travel time, therefore giving more time to do other things. Also understanding strengths and weaknesses for colleagues that are working together, especially here on the field, while also giving an understanding of our family and friends and what their strengths and weaknesses are and how they're coping. So definitely it has contributed to us becoming a little bit more resilient. At the same time, we need to become aware of burnout because big chances of blurring our work and family and all of these and not paying attention to ourselves. So,
Renuka, I'd like to add one thing just to support what you're saying, because I think it's really important.
go ahead.
Talking a lot about thoughts and feelings, and a lot of times we can worry a lot or have what's called anticipatory anxiety. We can be anxious or fearful about things that haven't occurred yet, but that could. And I want to put that in context because there's an evolutionary history called the negativity bias. In other words, I want to take it out of this concept that there's something wrong with that and actually say that from the perspective of evolution, those of us who are careful, who plan ahead, who may even be really fearful and worried, actually are likely to have survived more in dangerous situations. So the animal that comes to the water and isn't quite sure and smells it and isn't quite sure that this is safe is likely to survive and get his genes into the larger gene pool than someone that just rushes into the water, starts drinking it, and dies either of a poison or gets killed by something in the water. So that negativity bias is really important to be aware that it exists in all of us from an evolutionary perspective. And how that manifests even in interpersonal relationships, often in partnerships, marriages, is that partnerships can go a long time with having a lot of positives. One negative thing comes up, it can almost destroy everything that people have developed. So there's now research that indicates that when somebody does something in a partnership that someone else is offended by, insulted, or hurt by, it takes at least 5 to 6 really positive experiences to balance out that one negative. So there are even some psychologists that say that we are Teflon for positive and we just are sponges for the negative. So to be kind to ourselves is important. To be aware that that's a tendency, so that when that comes up, we might say, maybe this isn't necessarily that same situation in the Serengeti with lions and tigers and bears. Maybe I can take a breath, slow it down a little, and think about things in a more positive way. Anyways, I just wanted to add that.
Sure. I think also I just wanted to, Marta has already spoken about working from home, family, and all of those. I just wanted to focus on one relationship issue. This has been an opportunity where couples have been working from home if both are working. Intimate adult partners have had significant impact upon, they have impact upon individuals' well-being. Now, this would be an opportunity to see what kind of personalities couples are living with. One might be laid back, the other might be excessively anxiety prone, and how the coping is going on. Are you anxious or are you not listening to your partner? So many of us have had past experiences to fall upon, but this present pandemic has not given us anything to fall back on, and we have to create our own roles and responsibilities of how we are coping away from stereotypical behaviors that we used to do before. One other thing that I would like to focus in respect for the anxiety and depression is be aware that it can exaggerate existing symptoms. So for the person who's already obsessive compulsive, the cleaning ritual might become a little bit worse. Or for the ones who is phobic, going to public places or touching anything might become a little bit more intense. So look at those behaviors in the context of what is happening and think that it's okay because but then at the same time, become aware and see what you can do about it. So I just want to end this by saying, where we talk about focus on the moment, is put your brain where your feet are. So where you are standing at the moment, think about what you're doing at that moment and focus on the present moment. Thank you.
All right. Well, I would like to shift it a little bit and talk about some of the research-based strategies that really do help with stress. And to go back again to kind of the essence or the core of psychological well-being, of feeling good. It's really an internal experience of mastery, accomplishment, self-acceptance, self-compassion. And so when we engage in exercise, and the research is suggesting 20 to 30 minutes of, based on our ages, of course, 20 or 30 minutes, 3-4 times a week of vigorous exercise really does help reduce the stress hormones in our body. And that's really important also for attitudes of a sense of accomplishment and empowerment. And it also reduces some anxiety. So exercise is really important. Now, because so many of us are self-quarantined, that may mean that our exercise rhythms will have to change. And I would encourage people, there are hundreds of great videos on YouTube where one can do core workouts or aerobic workouts literally in your apartment or in your house, to be able to stay healthy, to stay grounded, and to be able to burn off some of the stress hormones is really a valuable part. So I would encourage people to go on YouTube, and maybe you start with beginner, and then you work through so that you have an access to other ways you can, in your home, stay healthy and exercise. Diet's crucial, and I'm going to kind of integrate diet also with alcohol. Diet's really important, and a lot of us have a real tendency, particularly under stress, to move towards eating carbs because they're simple sugars. And people often ask, well, why do I do that? Well, some people say, hey, well, they taste good. You know, potato chips, chocolate chip cookies, sitting down with ice cream or beer. All of those taste good. But there's also, again, a physiological reason for that. That what simple sugars do is, ironically, they get into your blood system very, very quickly upon eating, as opposed to, say, vegetables or fish or meat. They get into your bloodstream very quickly, and they tell your body biochemically that you're safe. And that may sound strange to you, but think about this for a minute. Think about millions of years ago. A gazelle is running away from a lion, and the gazelle is running. They're in survival mode. They're in fight or flight. And does the gazelle look at a really beautiful tree or grass and say, hey, I'm going to stop that? No. They'll worry about that if they survive. So what eating does is it tells the body, I'm not being attacked. I'm not in danger. I'm not under threat. And what stress really is perceived threat. Whether those are a traffic jam, don't have a job, financial issues, conflicts in marriage or relationships, children. Stress is a perceived threat, a danger. And our bodies respond to that danger as if it were a bar fight, or for that matter, being attacked by a bear. So our bodies, as we eat simple sugars, whether it's alcohol or potato chips or cookies, what it does is it says, oh, temporarily I feel safe. Oh, because you must be safe. I'm not being attacked. The problem with that is once in a while it's fine. But pretty soon some people end up developing habits of eating food that really is not healthy. It might be very heart unhealthy, or weight with respect to weight, or alcohol, or developing habits like this. It could be really truly dangerous. So to be very conscious, to be very aware of how we find ways to feel safe in our body, how we find ways to increase our well-being, to emotionally thrive. They are ways that actually enhance our health. So exercise, diet, limited use of alcohol are all ways of being empowered, experiencing some mastery in our lives, some discipline, which gives us even an increased sense of well-being. So those would be pieces that I would encourage. And something that I think the research is really talking a lot about is what Renuka talked about, is the ability to be present. And the more opportunities we have to check in with our own bodies, where is our breath? Is it low and slow, meaning easy and calm and lower in the body? Or is it high and shallow in our chest, which might indicate fear or tension? Take that deep breath to slow it down every once in a while. To check in with our bodies. Are we tense? What's our core experience? There's some research that says that if we soften our cores, core meaning that area in the center of our body that we usually go work out, we do sit-ups and push-ups and planks and all of that. Is that core soft? Because if our core is soft, then the rest of our body can release tension. Because tension is a perceived threat. So the more we slow our breathing down, lower breathing down into our diaphragm, the more we check in with our bodies frequently, say, I'm going to let that tension go. The more we feel safe in our bodies, and it's a welcome place to be, and enhances our well-being. Another thing which people don't really realize in the research is helping others actually helps ourselves. There is significant research that shows that we are social beings and we love to be in relationship. Even introverts love to be in relationships. And the more we help others, the more we end up feeling good about ourselves, end up feeling helpful towards ourselves. So helping others is not just an act of altruism or selflessness. It's also a way of reaching out and connecting, supporting somebody else, and in return, feeling supported by doing so. So relationships are absolutely crucial to maintain in a time of, in any kind of really stressful experience, but particularly now when many of us are much more isolated. How can we find ways to not just connect, but to actually help and support other people? And to really investigate that a little bit, where I'm asking each of our participants to check in with your bodies. How are you doing? Where's your tension? Where's your breath? Also check in and go, are there people I would like to support? Are there issues that I would like to support, to get engaged with? Because that will truly have a very positive effect on us. One of the things, working for an international organization is it's interesting where people turn to get their information on COVID-19 or anything else. Because I frequently get questions from people that I'm kind of wondering, where did this come from? Didn't come from WHO, didn't come from the CDC, didn't come from what I would consider reputable sources. But the internet has lots of different sources, and they're not necessarily very well researched, empirically supported. And I think we need to be super careful about that, because then, kind of going back to Renuka for a minute, it can worsen our anxiety if we are listening to things that may not actually be based in reality. There are a lot of conspiracy theories out there. There are a lot of things that people say about COVID and other things that may not be actually actual, based in research. So I would caution people as much as possible to really think through where you get your source of information. Likely your government, each country's government has some very legitimate sources of information that are trustworthy. And so I would suggest that people do as much as they can, sort of just really making certain that the sources of information are valuable. And as I've already mentioned, I think it's really important to be in relationship, to be Zoom and Skype and any other technique to use to make sure that you're in ongoing contact and connection with family and friends, because we are social beings. And the more we're connected, the more we feel support and supported by others, the much more likely we'll be able to, returning to the metaphor, return to that eye of the storm and find a place to sit, being present, letting our mind follow our feet. And even though things around us are quite chaotic or crazy, we can find that quiet space to watch it and still feel okay within ourselves and in our bodies.
Very good.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
No, I was just going to turn it over to Gustavo. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And please notice as well, I think Dr. Ellis is using a noise canceling headphone, which means that when he's not speaking, it might give the impression that he's being cut, but no, it's actually we can hear everything that he's saying. It's just because of the nature of the head canceling phone that creates the kind of impression at times. Thank you, Dr. Ellis and Dr. Sangvi. We have received a few questions here. And if that's okay with you, I will read out some of them. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Let's go
All
for it.
right. The first one is how to stay motivated. There are days when it's very difficult to get out of bed. So what can we do in those kinds of days?
Well, I think, Renuka, I can start and then you can take the rest on. I think that's a great question. And it's important to do what some people will refer to as to set an intention. Because the reality is sometimes it is doggone hard to get out of bed. And thus we create our own self-structure. We create the structure in our day where we want to accomplish certain things, where we can feel a sense of mastery over what we've done, where we can feel that we really enjoy what we're doing and that we can accept what's going on. So to set an intention is really important, which will then help us focus our attention on what we might like to do today. I want to work out this morning, make a healthy lunch, get the kids to school, read a book, have a conference call, connect with my friends, all a variety of different things that may be important to do that day. To structure that maybe the night before, to set yourself a little bit of a time schedule. It doesn't have to be rigid, but to set the intention, you can focus on doing these things, and it will definitely help with motivation. Give it some meaning to you. Pick things that have meaning, that are important, and that you can invest some energy in, and that will likely help you get out of bed and even be excited about what you can do. Renuka, would you like to add anything to that?
I think we are creatures of habit, structures, and routines. And there is a tendency, and I personally experienced that on days that I had to work out of the hotel office. I don't have to go down, I don't have to take the shuttle. So you tend to procrastinate, you tend to do that. But again, following to the routine, like as though we are going to work every day, would help. So yes, those are some strategies people can use, even though we are not working from the office or changed working styles during this time. Keeping those routines are important.
Very good. Thank you very much. There's another question as well that's quite interesting. Are there any special markers for children's psychological well-being during this period? They miss their friends a lot, so most likely a mother asking about that.
Yes, and I said to that as children, yes, we can find them becoming clingier. And remember that children pick up on the anxieties of the adults around them. So being mindful about that would really be helpful. Being calm and finding solutions and coping in a healthy manner would set up as a role model for the children as well. Reassurance, comforting, and communication is also important. Yes, children want to be social, and this would be one of the difficult times for them not to be going out to the playgrounds, not to doing things that way. So again, moderately, can we have them interacting the way we adults are interacting by FaceTime, by Skype, and connecting with people and friends? I know in the US and Canada, people are doing these, teachers are using cars and driving past the children's schools, and children are standing and waving. So I think people have come up with creative ideas of how to involve children and not make them feel that they are homeschooling and not going to the playgrounds and a lot of social activities being curtailed.
And I would like to emphasize and support what Renuka said in terms of a lot of times children are like barometers. They can pick up the experience, the feelings of those that there are caretakers that they love. Our nervous systems are designed literally through evolution to be able to scan what other people might be experiencing just to stay safe. So if little people are experiencing anxiety because their parents are anxious or the parents are upset or there's a conflict in the relationship or structure has changed dramatically, things are less predictable, and the parents, the caretakers, are themselves struggling, children will likely pick that up, not quite understand where it's coming from, but they'll act it out. So to be able to be aware as caretakers to find ways to increase one's well-being, one's sense of groundedness and presence and calm will definitely have a positive effect on our children.
Very good. Thank you very much. I have now a question for Marta, which is actually quite telling, since Marta actually supervises 12 people, so it's quite a large team. But after Marta gives her insight, it will be interesting to hear from the psychologist as well regarding management of people on that level. So the question is how to make regular group team meetings efficient. It can feel like a waste of time to chat and do small talk and no exchange on what we are doing or supposed to do and what we accomplished and what we're struggling with. How can we learn to be more open with each other and direct? What's your take on that, Marta?
Thank you, Gustavo. Yeah, definitely an important question because on one side, we don't want to be over communicating in the in an inefficient way and just repeating ourselves a lot. But on the other side, of course, we do want to express to others what we are doing, and I think it's even more important now that we are working remotely to say things that might appear redundant if we are working all together and we know what each of us are doing, but they are not that redundant or logical or evident if we are actually working from home. I think that Gustavo, we have a very good arrangement with what I mentioned before on having several meetings a week and knowing what we are going to expect on those meetings. So some of them are actually focused on discussing something in particular, and people know that they don't have to talk about everything they're doing. Other meetings are actually exactly for the opposite. Just tell me what you're doing. And the others are just for leisure. Let's just join and not talk about work and just laugh and have a drink together, basically, no? And also, I would add the HR breakfast, e-breakfast that we are doing with our director, where again there is a purpose for these meetings, and whatever we say, we know what more or less the topics that we are going to discuss and how deep we need to go into them. So I do think that there are opportunities there to discuss with people things that might be redundant for some or might seem redundant, but they're not. And then other opportunities to discuss things where, okay, it's just maybe better to just focus on one matter and dive into it.
Very good. Thank you, Marta. Do the psychologists would you have anything to add to that?
I have something to add here. Is basically an interesting observation that I have noticed. I think this is a perfect time, and managers can actually start looking at it and understand the pattern, I suppose. The ones that have no problem communicating even before the COVID seem to be communicating pretty good even during this time remotely. But the ones that were not very communicative before are withdrawing more and becoming more isolated. So here, I guess it also the stress should be on some of the leadership and managers to be proactive in connecting with these people that they don't hear too much of and ask how they are doing. And also, if there's been any problems, this is the best way to actually improve those interpersonal relationships while we don't have any other stressors at the same time as we would be if we were doing a regular work shift.
Thank you, Dr. Sangvi. Dr. Ellis, would you have anything else to add?
Well, I would just add to what Marta and Renuka were saying, that I think that there are overt reasons for a meeting. It might be discussing operations. It might be discussing some plan that one has to move an issue forward. There's always an overt reason that connects people to have a conversation, focus on a conversation. But I would also argue psychologically that there are always reasons that are covert, that are under the table. And those reasons are usually, how can we find ways to support each other, where people feel empowered, where they feel witnessed, where they feel accepted. So for managers and leaders, those of us who do that, to always find ways through that overt goal, find ways to acknowledge people, to support them, to witness them, and to empower. And so that as the overt and covert sort of interact, it's a way that a meeting where people will walk away from the meeting feeling seen and feeling good about themselves, which again goes back to well-being and self-acceptance. So just that there are multiple reasons for meetings, and that we need to attend as managers, we need to attend all those reasons.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. There is one question that popped up in here. And the question says, the person says, I particularly appreciate the point that Marta raised and the other presenters touched upon the notion that there is no such a thing as over communicating. And here comes the question. But how could one cope with instances in which one may feel guilty, inadequate, or feel like a burden when communicating with one's supervisor and team about personal daily psychological well-being and burdens? Would anybody want to take this first?
Okay. I think there's a balance. It's an interesting. I'm not having to read it because I'm trying to process the question. I think there's a balance. Not all managers are, and I think there's part of it is I think in some, so not all managers cope with stress the same way. A little bit, Renuka was talking about. Some of us will thrive in stress, and some others will shut down and contract. And so it's difficult to know. There's no real clear answer to support the person asking the question, because a lot of it depends on each manager, each leader, each supervisor. We really are different. We really manage stress differently. We manage conflict differently. We all come from different cultures, not language. English isn't all of our first languages. So there's so much room in spaces like this for misunderstandings, losing confidence. So to maybe to start with the foundation that not all of us see the world or manage stress or relationships and conflicts in the same way. And then to try to maybe shift it to that particular question, I think there needs to be a balance between how much I share with my supervisor and how much I may need to find other people to support me when I'm struggling with issues.
Actually, that's a good point, George. I think I agree upon that to have a separation and be able to vent out and find some solutions also before talking to the supervisor, so they come up with some practical solutions. But also, I think they can communicate. For example, it might be a meeting with the school teacher online with regards to your child, simultaneously colliding with the meeting with the supervisor, and just share which is more important. Maybe if there is an urgency with the school, pay attention to that and set up your meeting later. Or if the meeting is urgent, request if you could talk to the teacher later. I suppose everybody is going to be a little bit more understanding and a little bit less rigid in accommodating people's difficulties and inconveniences. Many of us have our own scale of perfectionism, which limits us from sharing. So it's okay to not be the super mom or super dad and say, yes, I'm having difficulty juggling with many tasks at this time. Could we probably do this a little later? So as a mom, I think that would be my suggestion to those moms and those parents that are going through this time.
Very good. We are getting to the end, so I have one more question to ask. And maybe we should send it to Marta first and then to the psychologist as well, since it's related to both, let's say, HR and psychological well-being. And the question is, how can managers take care of themselves since we have to be more emotionally available for our staff at this time as we endeavor to provide the best possible support at times?
Thank you, Gustavo. And it's really a good question because we are human beings. We are also parents. For us, this situation is as odd and awkward and exceptional as for anybody else. And yet we need to lead by example and be there for the rest, no? So definitely the information that the psychologists were mentioning before is important. I think it's also important to discuss with other counterparts or colleagues who are also managers, and discuss with them ideas they might have, or concerns they might have, where managers can help each other cope with this. And I think the communication in a professional way, not in a gossip way or in an informal way, with your own team, showing not only that you're there for them, but you're showing empathy. I am there for you as much as you can be there for me, as a human being, so to say. All these things can definitely help. And something that I would also mention that has to do with the previous question and this one as well. There are moments when we need to see the boundaries and the limitations on how much other colleagues, managers can give us, and we also or even friends, and we also sometimes we need to identify moments when we have to say, okay, this I need to solve with professional help. And that's where maybe you need to seek for psychological help, and I would include not only all staff members but also managers to take this into consideration.
Great point, Marta. Would the psychologist have something to add?
Well, I would just say Mark's right. I mean, I think self-care is self-care, self-care. The more we're taking care of ourselves, the more available we will be for other people.
I would reiterate on the same thing, self-care. Be aware of yourself, how much you're giving, and be very aware of burnout at this stage, because you are working, you are supporting, and you're also listening to your higher ups. So managers are in a much tougher position, but their self-care is also important.
Fantastic. And just to finalize, if that's okay with all of you, I'd like to hear from each of you one main idea that you find important that the audience could get from this webinar and the individuals who would listen to it in the future. If there is one thing you find important that you'd like people to take from this presentation, what would that be? Dr. Ellis first.
Good question. Well, I think it would be find that we're always going to be in positions where the world is unpredictable, scary, dangerous. And so to work to manage our own nervous systems, to find that calm, that eye in the storm, that place where we can be present and grounded, even while we're working with difficult and challenging situations. So for me, what the takeaway is learning to manage my own nervous system, be able to stay calm because it will affect others, and to be able to thrive even when there are times that are really challenging.
Thank you, sir. And Dr. Sangvi, with the psychological well-being perspective, what would be the main message for you?
I think resilience is one thing I would communicate to everybody. We have survived 3 months. People have managed to change their lives and change many things. So I think everybody has those strengths of coping with the changing environment, but very few of us take or acknowledge our achievements and success and want to perfect it. So it's okay to make some mistakes, But I think predominantly, if everybody's doing okay at this time, in the middle of almost coming to the end of it, but we don't know what's in the future, I think you'll be able to cope even whatever comes in the future because you've survived this time.
Thank you, Dr. Sangvi. Marta, with a human resources and remote working or management perspective, what would be the most important thing for you?
I think, Gustavo, what I would say is what we were mentioning before, communication as one of the key competencies, so to say, that was always important and now is just absolutely essential in everybody. And in saying this, I would also add in general to see this exceptional situation as from the positive perspective as much as you can, understanding that is extremely difficult, and seeing that we have somehow the opportunity to communicate much better now in a much calmer way and with a lot more time in a way, no? Not only with our colleagues and managers and collaborators, but also with our own families. Bonding has just become one of the primary, things that we are doing now that we so much missed while we were running from one place to the other before COVID.
Very good. Very, very interesting, insightful thoughts. I very much appreciate the time of the psychologists and Marta in participating in this. What you see on the screen are some of the infographics that the Department of Human Resources have created to share with employees across the OSCE executive structures. And you can actually take a look at those infographics and use them yourself should you be interested. All you need to do is actually Google the words remote working, OSCE, and infographics, and you're going to be directed to a page where you can download. And we have infographics with remote working tips for managers, tips for employees, tips for parents and caregivers, and gender sensitive tips for managers. Again, on behalf of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, we very much appreciate your tuning in and talking to us today. Whether you're applying for a job with us or not, that's irrelevant. We just wanted to make sure that we shared and that we leverage some of the great expertise in human resources and in psychological well-being that we have at the organization. So thank you again for your participation and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Gustav. Thank you, George. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Everybody be well and do take care.